Hi, ducks. Welcome to the lesson 3.4 and 3.7, rounding and estimating decimals. Let's take a minute to review the lesson scale. By the end of this lesson, we would like you to be able to use place value understanding to round decimals to any place and use benchmarks to provide reasonable estimates. I want to give you a few reminders before we get started. Rounding decimals is very similar to rounding whole numbers. We know that if the digit to the right of the digit in the rounding place is greater than 5, then the digit in the rounding place increases by 1, and the digits to the right of that number are dropped. If the digit to the right of the digit in the rounding place is less than 5, then the digit in the rounding place stays the same and the digits to the right of that number are dropped. Let's look at our first I do problem. I'm going to go ahead and do cubes as we are reading the problem. Miss Walker's class has a crested gecko pet named Clementine. She is 4.568 inches in length. What is the length of Clementine, okay, we want it of Clementine the gecko, rounded to the nearest hundredth of an inch? Okay, so we want the length of the gecko rounded to the nearest hundredth of an inch. And then we also want to know what is her length, again, to the nearest tenth. And then lastly, so this is a three-part question, we want to know what is her length to the nearest whole inch. So what is her length to the nearest whole inch, nearest tenth, and nearest hundredth? If she is 4.568 inches in length. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write out our number. You can use your understanding of place value or you can use the chart. So I'm going to write the number 4.568 below the place value chart. And I'm going to start the 4 here because that's in the ones place. Then we have our decimal, 5 in the tenths, 6 in the hundredths, and 8 in the thousandths. Okay, now we're ready to get started. So let's first do to the nearest hundredth. In order to round the hundredths place, let's find our hundredths place. It is a 6. We're going to look next door to the thousandths place. We always look to the right, and you can even underline that number, and that number is greater than 5. If that number is greater than 5, we're going to round the 6 up to a 7. So 4.568 rounded to the nearest hundredth equals 4.57 inches. Now let's go ahead and take a look at rounding the length of Clementine to the nearest tenth. Okay, so let's find our tenths. We have 5 tenths. We're once again going to look next door to the right of the tenth, which is a 6. So if we have 6 hundredths, that's going to determine that we need to round up. So if we're rounding to the nearest tenth, the length of Clementine is 4.6 inches. Because remember, I told you in our reminders that you drop the rest of the digits to the right of the place value that you are rounding. Lastly, let's look at our length to the nearest whole inch. Well, our whole inches are 4 inches. So now we need to determine, are we going to round up to 5 inches or are we going to round down or stay the same at 4? So once again, we're going to look next door to the tenths place, and it is 5 tenths, which means we're going to round up. And so to the nearest whole number, Clementine is about 5 inches in length. Let's go on to the I do again. Okay, this scenario is just a little bit different. Now we're going to be estimating in dollars. So my class, Miss Walker's class, wants to purchase 2 crested geckos. The female gecko costs $12.79, female gecko, and the male gecko costs $15.98. We want to know about how much do the 2 geckos cost, 2 geckos, in all. So we know if we have in all and we have about how much, we're going to be estimating the total. So we're going to be adding. So we need to use our understanding of rounding to estimate the total cost of these 2 geckos. We're first going to round to the nearest $10, Then we're going to round to the nearest whole dollar. Let's do the $10 first. We're going to round to the nearest $10. This is our estimate.
Oh, there you go.
And then we're going to round to the nearest whole dollars. Okay, so let's first go ahead and we're going to add together $12.79 and $15.98. And before we can add these 2 numbers together, we're first going to round to the nearest $10. So in order to do to the nearest $10, we're going to look first at $12.79, and we're going to decide that we have a 7 in the 10th place, and that's going to determine, do we round to 10 or do we round up to 20? Since we have a 7 in the 10th place, that means that we're going to round this first number is going to round. We're actually going to, sorry, I need to back this up. We're actually going to look next door here to round to the 10th, or to the nearest $10. My mistake. So we have a 2 in the ones place, which means we're going to round down to $10. And then for $15.98, we're going to look the ones place. We have a 5, which means we're going to round up or estimate that that cost is about $20. So our estimate to the nearest $10 is $30. So in total, these are going to cost about $30. That's our estimate. Now let's go ahead and estimate to the nearest whole dollar. Okay, so that's what I kind of had confused there. So sorry if I created any confusion. So now what we're going to do is we can look to the 10th place to determine the nearest whole dollar. And 12.79, the 7 determines that we're going to estimate that the female gecko is about $13. And the male gecko, because we have a 9 in the 10th place, we're going to estimate that the male gecko costs about $16. So in total, to the whole dollar, our estimate is that the geckos in total are going to cost about $29. Now let's do another strategy. I'm going to call this our redo. It's a strategy, so once again, you can understand it, but you don't necessarily have to use it if you do not want to. We can use benchmarks to estimate on a number line. So we're going to look at the problem 0.76 minus 0.22. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate and graph each point on this number line for each decimal. Before we do so, I want to point out that the center right here is 0.5. And this marker right here, this benchmark is 0.75. And that makes this one, because it's about halfway between, or it is halfway between 0 and 0.5, is 0.25. So now, what we need to do is we need to locate and graph each point on the number line for each decimal. So we're going to locate 0.76. Well, 0.76 is barely past 0.75 right here. And then 0.22, we know it's a little bit less than 0.25. So I'm going to place it about there. Okay, so now we have our 2 points. There we go. And next, we're going to identify which benchmark each decimal is closer to in order to come up with our estimate. So if we look at our 0.22, we can determine that the benchmark that it's closest to is 0.25. And if we look at 0.76, we can determine that the benchmark that it's closest to is 0.75. So if we are subtracting, we're going to estimate that 0.75 minus I don't know why it keeps doing that, 0.22 is equal to, or sorry, not 0.22, 0.25, because that's the benchmark, 0.25 is about 0.5. So that is another way that we can estimate. All right, now it's your turn to do the problem. Go ahead and read the problem, pause the video, and we'll come back and check. And we're back. Let's go ahead and check our work. So we know that we have this banana protein powder that Miss Walker's purchasing for her geckos. It is $7.89. We also have crickets. Now it doesn't really matter that we have 25. I put that in there to see if I could throw you off. And those cost $4.67. We want to know the total cost to the nearest tenth, and we want to know the approximate cost estimated to the nearest whole dollar. So let's first see how we rounded to the nearest tenth. So if we rounded to the nearest tenth, we should have had $7.89, which rounds to $7.90, and $4.67 rounds to $4.70. And so rounded to the nearest tenth, we should have come up with a cost of $12.60. Now, if we want to estimate the approximate cost to the nearest whole dollar, we would have said that $7.89 would be approximately $8, and $4.67 would be approximately $5, for an estimated cost of $13. Let's go ahead and do another you do problem. Go ahead and pause the video after reading the question, and we'll come back and check our answer. Okay, ducks, let's see if we've got this. So first we were supposed to round to the nearest tenth, round Tyrone's length, he's giant, and to the nearest tenth, we should have come up with 9.9 inches. To the nearest hundredth, we should have come up with 9.87 inches. And then lastly, we were asked to estimate the length of Tyrone to the nearest whole number, and we should have come up with approximately 10 inches as our estimate. Go ahead and review the scale for this lesson. Please record where you are now after watching the video, and we will see you in class mañana.